Book 2, Chapter 7 deals primarily with eschatology in a new light from what was believed previously in Islam. It is very fascinating, yet very abstruse and not easily comprehensible. This is where it gets really deep. The chapter begins with a remarkable, yes, yet mystical elucidation of the notion of death. In fact, the chapter's opening line reads on the exposition of the truth of death, حقيقة الموت, and verily it is true. So this is the opening line on the exposition, or the entitle, or the title of it, on the exposition of the truth of death, and verily it is true. Chapter 8 is about 7 pages long in the original language and consists of about 149 handwritten lines, making it the third longest chapter of Book 2. Only a small section, about 2/3 of a page of this chapter, has been translated into English by the Baha'i World Center. And it's really interesting. The part that they have translated does not cover the main theme, which is the interpretation and the eschatology of death. The translated passages deal with God, revelation, him whom God shall make manifest, and the primal will. These excerpts are as follows in their chronological order. The revelation of the divine reality hath everlastingly been identical with its concealment, and its concealment identical with its revelation. That which is intended by revelation of God is the tree of divine truth that betokeneth none but him. And it is this divine tree that hath raised and will raise up messengers, and hath revealed and will reveal scriptures. From eternity unto eternity, this tree of divine truth hath served and will continue and will ever serve as the throne of the revelation and concealment of God among his creatures. And in every age is made manifest through whomsoever he pleaseth. At the time of the revelation of the Quran, he asserted his transcendent power through the advent of Muhammad, and on the occasion of the revelation of the Bayán, he demonstrated his sovereign might through the appearance of the point of the Bayán. And when he whom God shall make manifest will shine forth, it will be through him that he will vindicate the truth of his faith. And he pleaseth with whatsoever he pleaseth, and for whatsoever he pleaseth. He is with all things, yet nothing is with him. He is not within a thing, nor above it, nor beside it. Any reference to his being established upon the throne implies that the exponent of his revelation is established upon the seat of transcendent authority. He hath everlastingly and will everlastingly continue to exist. He hath been and will ever remain inscrutable unto all men, inasmuch as all else besides him have been and shall ever be created through the potency of his command. He is exalted above every mention or praise, and is sanctified beyond every word of commendation or every comparison. No created thing comprehends him, while he in truth comprehends all things. Even when it is said no created thing comprehends him, this refers to the mirror of his revelation, that is, him whom God shall make manifest. Indeed, too high and exalted is he for anyone to allude unto him. Now, in The Gate of the Heart, Dr. Saidi, in the chapter discussing the concept of the primal will, he quotes the following passage from Book 2, Chapter 8 of the Persian Bayán, and I will share with you that passage. In this passage, the Bab writes, in like manner, gaze upon all the names and attributes with his eyes. Thus, when a servant comes to know, he sees that none knows but him. And when he obtains the power to accomplish something, he sees that none is powerful but him. For in each dispensation, all who are guided by that revelation are naught but the manifold modes of that manifestation of God. Therefore, wert thou to look at all the revelations from the first, which was that of Adam, to infinity, thou wouldst not see anything endued with reality except through God, and wouldst fail to recognize the manifestation of divinity except through the exalted tree of his revelation, which is naught but the primal will. This is the decree, for naught else is possible in this contingent world. The Bab continues in that passage, this is the fruit of existence of all things, or all humans, since all things depend upon the primal will for their existence, and naught is seen in everything but the revelation of God in accordance with the degree of the reality of any entity which bears the divine revelation. I think that's the end of that passage from chapter 8. So moving on to chapter 9. Chapter 9 is entitled on the exposition of the truth of the sepulcher or the tomb. حقيقة القبر. So حقيقة القبر. The first line of this chapter begins with these profound and thought-provoking words. This is my provisional translation because there's no other translation anywhere else of this particular chapter and this passage. So I'm just giving you the first line, and you'll see that in the subsequent chapters as well, just giving you it's sort of the opening passage and the where the Bab gives you the summary of the chapter. So the essence or the substance of this gate is that for every spirit, God hath appointed a sepulcher in the limit of its place, and at the time of the appearance of him whom God shall make manifest, all spirits shall culminate in a soul by the resurrection of which all shall be raised, and his resurrection shall be the resurrection of all, and his creation the creation of all. Very profound, and I'm not going to comment any further on that. I just gave you the translation of what it says. It's quite profound, this next 4 or 5 chapters. Now, these are all deals, this concept of sepulcher, and you're going to see various other titles. These were referred to in the doctrine, in the theology and the eschatology of Shia Islam. So what the Bab is doing, he is restating some of these important aspects of the day of resurrection, and he's expounding on it. And he is basically it's his exegesis on these very important and key terms and concepts that was established as part of the canon of the theology of Shia Islam. Now, as I mentioned to you, no parts of this chapter has been translated by the Baha'i World Center, nor any parts of it has been discussed or quoted by Dr. Saidi in his book. So the excerpt I gave you was just to give you a kind of a taste of what the heading of that chapter is. Now, it's quite an abstruse exposition on the eschatological significance of the notion of qabr, the tomb or sepulcher, in relation to the day of resurrection. So chapter 9 consists of 79 handwritten lines in its original language of Revelation. Moving on to chapter 10. This chapter, like chapter 9, again, focuses on the same theme, and it seems to be continuous. on the exposition of the questioning of the angels in the sepulcher. The first few lines of this chapter are as follows, my translations. The essence of this gate, or the substance of this gate, is that on the day of resurrection, the believers in him whom God shall make manifest shall ask the people, by what thing or proof is your religion established? Then shall they answer, by the proof of the Bayán. And if on that day they are a believer in the verses of God, then they will answer the angels with proofs that God had revealed and taught them. Otherwise, the angels will return to the presence of God and declare their state, and God shall accordingly pass judgment against them with words of punishment if they had not been a believer, or reveal to them words of mercy if they had become a believer. So this is the first couple of lines of that. So those who come to believe, what I gathered so far in that passage in a very superficial way is that those who are believers, they are going to be working with the angels, or they are acting as God's emissary to the peoples of the world. And this is very much in consonance with the reference that Baha'u'lláh says that the believers, the companion of God's ark, are essentially his chosen people. And so in some way, we should all feel very blessed that we are amongst that group. So you will see that the believers and the unbelievers here is very much in the same way that in the revelation of Islam was that the infidel and it was made it very clear. Here the Bab does resonate and echoes those similar sentiments that had been revealed previously. So no parts of this chapter 10 has been translated by the Baha'i World Center, nor any parts of it has been discussed or quoted by Dr. Saidi in his book. Like the previous chapter, it is an eschatological commentary on one of the aspects of the day of resurrection. It's a relatively short chapter and only consists of 18 handwritten lines, one of the shortest in its original language of Revelation. In fact, it is the second shortest chapter of Book 2. Chapter 10. Moving on to chapter 11. Chapter 11 is entitled on the exposition that the resurrection, al-Ba'th, is indeed true. No parts of this chapter has been translated by the Baha'i World Center, nor any parts of it has been discussed or quoted by Dr. Saidi in his book. And I'm not going to go too much into this. It is the continuation of the Bab's eschatological exegesis concerning the day of resurrection. And it consists of 34 handwritten lines in its original language, and it's one of the shorter chapters of Book 2. Chapter 12 is entitled on the exposition of the bridge of Sirat, and that it is indeed true. The first couple of lines. Now this Sirat, this is the same Sirat, and I'll talk about this, in a moment, that you read in Surah Al-Fatiha, the opening chapter of the Quran. اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. This is part of the chapter that is recited as part of the Salat, as part of the Muslim obligatory prayer 5 times a day. And so this reference of Sirat is very much both in Sunni Islam and Shia Islam. Now the Shiites have taken it to the next level in their commentary, and essentially it has many attributes. It's basically the bridge of straight and narrow that the believer takes as he or she traverses to heaven. And but it's like a tightrope that not everyone can withstand it. And beneath it is the crevasse that I believe it ends with the hellfire or the molten lava. I think something to that effect, some kind of mythology around that. Again, I don't want to get into that, but and those who cannot pass, they cannot get to heaven, essentially. So the first couple of lines of this chapter are as follows. The essence or substance of this gate is that which is meant by the bridge of Sirat in every age is the manifestation of God, the Báb says, and his cause. Whosoever adheres to the cause of the manifestation of God is firmly established upon the bridge or the Sirat of truth. Otherwise, he's deprived of traversing the Sirat, or this bridge. No parts of this chapter, again, has been translated by the Baha'i World Center or Dr. Saidi. It is a continuation of the Báb's eschatological exegesis concerning the day of resurrection. It's about 37 handwritten lines, this chapter, in its original, and it is amongst the shorter chapters that we encounter in Book 2. Moving on to Chapter 13. Chapter 13 is entitled On the Exposition of the Truth of the Balance, Al-Mizan, and that is that it is indeed true. The first couple of sentences of this chapter may read as follow. The essence of this gate or this chapter is that from the beginning point of the primal will, Mashiyat Avvaliyeh, that's primal will, unto infinity, in every revelation, the balance is that point of truth, Nuqteye Haqiqat, and the ordinances that dawn from the sun of his bounty. So Nuqteye Haqiqat is a reference to the manifestation of God, in this case being the Báb, and he was Bahá'u'lláh, the primal point. So this is Nuqteye Haqiqat, the point of truth. And the ordinances that dawn, the laws and ordinances that dawn from the sun of his bounty, which are essentially here being the Bayán, the injunctions, the tenets that that manifestation of God brings forth to humanity, in this case being that of the Báb. The chapter's first few lines continues. The next sentence I'm sharing with you. It says, the highest degree of this balance in unity is the phrase, there is none other God but him. La ilaha illallah. Whosoever enters the balance of denial, mizan and nafi, hath entered the balance of fire, mizan nar. And whoever enters the balance of confirmation, mizan isbat, has entered the balance of paradise, mizan jannat. Again, no parts of this chapter has been translated by the Baha'i World Center nor quoted by Dr. Saidi in his book. It is yet another eschatological exposition by the Báb concerning the day of resurrection. Again, a short chapter, 25 handwritten lines, being amongst the shortest chapter of Book 2. Moving on to Chapter 14. So you can see these chapters are very similar and deal with some of these concepts in a very, it's truly brilliant. When you read it, you're just, spellbound by what the Báb is revealing. And I don't feel comfortable translating them because they are way beyond my capacity to be able to understand them at this stage. Perhaps if I reflected for a long time on them and read them and looked at other writings and so on and so forth, I could come to some semblance of understanding. But these are very abstruse, and again, because it's dealing with some very specific things, and it's almost like the Bab is opening up a new window to something that has never been seen, and suddenly is showing us this vista that it is just marvelous and magnificent, yet for many of us it's incomprehensible. Some of this may have been at the time very comprehensible to some of those doctors of the faith and the students of Sayyid Kazim al-Ashti and the Sheikhis and so on and so forth. So again, it remains to be seen, but at this stage we're just going to leave them as they are, and for further exploration. So chapter 14 is entitled On the Exposition of the Reckoning, al-Hisab. The first couple of sentences reads, the essence of this gate or chapter is that the reckoning of all is in the hand of God, and none other than him is empowered to perform this reckoning. The Lord of the universe reckons all created things through the reckoning of the tree of truth, shajareh haqiqat. This is the tree of truth that I have translated here, but the original is shajareh haqiqat. He continues in this next sentence, he, the tree of truth, being the manifestation of God, reckons all in the day of resurrection through a single phrase. And this I found very fascinating. And that is, verily, I am God, and there is none other God but me, the Lord of all created things. Inni ana Allah, la ilaha illa ana rabba kulla shay. This is something that Baha'u'lláh revealed in his public proclamation. You see this in the various tablets, Surat al-Muluk, and later on his Adrianople tablets. If you look at that, Surat al-Ashab, you'll see that. So I found that very fascinating because of my previous studies on Baha'u'llah's public proclamation. You see that. So, Inni ana Allah la ilaha illa ana rabba kulla shay. Verily I am God, and there is none other God but me, the Lord of all created things. Fascinating. Beautiful. So friends, that's all I'm going to share with you. I hate to tease you with it, but that this is a survey. This is a concise. So that's all we can do. I wish I could go more in depth. Even this was quite a task to do. No parts of this chapter, again, has been translated by the Baha'i World Center, nor any parts of it has been discussed or quoted by Dr. Saidi. Like the previous 5 chapters, it is another eschatological exposition by the Bab concerning the day of resurrection. And it consists of 50 handwritten lines, a little bit longer, but still amongst the shorter ones. Chapter 15 is entitled On the Exposition of the Book Al-Kitab, and it is indeed true. The first sentence of this chapter, the Bab states, the essence of this gate is that what is meant by the book is that which is revealed from the direction of the point of truth. Nuqteh haqiqat, again, the one that was mentioned. So again, he uses the same phrase. So that which, and then he goes on extensively what this book is, and then, not only just the book of Revelation, but talks about the entire Revelation and other nuances, which is, again, brilliant and baffling and mind-boggling. So this truly will blow your mind. No part of this chapter, again, has been translated. Now, although the theme of this chapter is somewhat similar to the previous 6, which dealt with an important aspect of the day of resurrection, it offers a unique perspective on the holy books of each manifestation of God, with a special focus on 3 dispensations. dispensation of Christ, Muhammad, the Bab, 4, and him whom God shall make manifest. The chapter is about 51 handwritten lines in its original language. Chapter 16 is entitled on the exposition of this, that paradise, al-Jannat, is true. And it's very beautiful. We had some references earlier on about paradise, that those who believe are truly attaining to paradise. So this further expounds on that theme, but focuses on, again, the Islamic notions, that particularly the Shia Islam notions, and he dispels some of their errors, and also, sheds more light and expounds on this new dimension of paradise. The essence of this gate, he writes, is that hitherto, this is very interesting, he says, hitherto, none except God's manifestations of his own self had understood the meaning of paradise and hellfire, nor what is pertaining to the mention of paradise in this world, which is the beginning and the end of all worlds. I found that phrase very fascinating, that this world is the beginning and the end of all worlds. Again, I just sharing literally what His Holiness the Bab is stating here. This is a very extensive chapter, again, on the theme of paradise and related, with 166 lines in the original manuscript that I have. Is the second longest chapter of Book 2. Only about 6 lines of this chapter have been translated into English by the Baha'i World Center, so I'm going to share with you that excerpt, so you will have it. So this is chapter 16. So the Bab writes, "It is better to guide one soul than to possess all that is on earth. For as long as that guided soul is under the shadow of the tree of divine unity, he and the one who hath guided him will both be recipients of God's tender mercy, whereas possession of earthly things will cease at the time of death. The path to guidance is one of love and compassion, not of force and coercion." I love that passage. "This hath been God's method in the past and shall continue to be in the future. He causeth him whom he pleaseth to enter the shadow of his mercy. Verily, he is the supreme protector, the all generous." Now, just a very subtle point here. There have been some scholars that in their analysis of the Qayyum al-Asma, the Bab's first work, his commentary on the Surah of Joseph, where he talks about jihad. In fact, I presented a paper on jihad, and I'm hoping to present another modified version of it, or an enhanced version of it this year at Irfan Colloquium. This concept, the Bab, they had said that Bab's was very militant in his revelation. And I believe, and some scholars like Dr. Muhammad Hussein, Masatullah Muhammad Husseini, in his book, has made it very clear that the Bab did talk about jihad, but he said only through his permission. And he never gave permission. And this is the offensive jihad that he's talking about. All those insurrections that we witness, like Sheikh Tabarsi, Zanjan, Neyriz, were actually defensive. They were very defensive. They were not actually jihad. If they were jihad, there would have been, I will tell you, there would be a bloodbath. And many of these early Babis were just waiting for the Bab to tell them to go to jihad. But the Bab never, ever gave permission. And in the Bayán, he has revealed laws that shows that, and we will see that you can't even hurt someone's feelings. This is the part that, that is in the Kitab al-Aqdas as well, that we should show friendliness and do not upbraid people and show kindness and, which is very much similar to the revelation of Jesus Christ, turn the other cheek, and so on and so forth. This is also a hallmark of the Báb's revelation. However, as I argued in my presentation, is that the Báb's revelation is that bridge. It had to bridge Islam to the new revelation of Bahá'u'lláh. So therefore, he had to make mention of jihad, because in fact, jihad is expected in the Shia tradition, that the Qa'im will come and would lead the jihad and will conquer the world, and so on and so forth. So there is a very graphic understanding that the Qa'im will arise and will raise the black standard and will basically cleanse the earth from the infidels and will establish Shia Islam as the religion, and so on and so forth. So this is something that the Báb did magnificently, the way, from, and later on with other instructors and scholars like Dr. Todd Lawson and Dr. Mujan Momin, that they're going to talk about the Qayyum al-Asma, you will see that. But this is something that when you see in the Bayán, which is really the culmination of his revelation, that he's making mention here that the path to guidance is one of love and compassion. How beautiful. And is not of force and coercion. So the force and coercion has been obliterated. And the very first thing, besides declaring himself as him whom God shall make manifest on first day of Rizwan, Baha'u'lláh blotted out, as he says in the tablet of Basharat, revealed many years later. And there's a new tablet that is in the days of remembrance, the gift that the House of Justice gave the Baha'i world recently, where Baha'u'lláh talks about those three things that occurred on the first day of Rizwan. One of them, that the law of the sword was completely abrogated. So jihad was abrogated, by Baha'u'lláh, clearly. And here the Báb had to make that transition. So brilliantly, absolutely brilliantly, he stated it, that you should, but that there is jihad and you must, rise up and so on. But then he says, but he gave a caveat. He said, but only if I give permission. And he never did. So again, absolutely brilliant in the way God made that transition and completely has abrogated the law of holy war. So continuing on, the next passage in this section that is translated by the House of Justice, there is no paradise more wondrous for any soul than to be exposed to God's manifestation in his day, to hear his verses and believe in them, to attain his presence, which is not but the presence of God, to sail upon the sea of the heavenly kingdom of his good pleasure, and to partake of the choice fruits of the paradise of his divine oneness. Beautiful. Absolutely beautiful. Now, moving on to chapter 17, it is entitled on the exposition of this, that hellfire and nar is true. So here now, the Báb previously talked about paradise. Now he's talking about the hellfire, or the nar, the fire. He writes, in the first couple of sentences, which I have translated here for you, the substance of this gate is that there hath been and always shall be endless degrees of hellfire. But the core essence of it is the absence of recognition of God. Irfan Allah. Irfan has been translated by The Guardian as the recognition and the recognition of God, Irfan Allah, which in every revelation would be the recognition of the person who appears as the manifestation of that revelation. So to read that again, that sentence, the substance of this gate is that there hath been and always shall be endless degrees of hellfire, but the core essence of it is the absence of the recognition of God, which in every revelation would be the recognition of the person who appears as the manifestation of that revelation. So the Báb goes into this discussion of beautifully, elegantly, and just an incredible and yet very simple language, in Persian in such a way that is understood. But again, it's still profound. It's still very deep. Some parts of it may seem to some as incomprehensible. I will tell you something that just came to my mind about reading and studying the writings of the Bab, friends. The late Abdul Hamid Eshraq-Khavari, in one of his articles, he said the writings of the Bab are like this candy that you take and you basically, you suck on it, and little by little you can appreciate its sweetness. I found that to be an incredible analogy, and it's so true, because at first you read it and you say, oh my God, I don't understand any part of it. And then you pray, and then you read it again. And then perhaps, that understanding, will come. Oftentimes it doesn't come, it's, some of this stuff is really meant to be concealed and as the Bab says very clearly, only three groups that can, him whom God shall make manifest, and the third group, those who him whom God shall make manifest wills and gives them the knowledge to understand it. And so, oftentimes may not be us, friends. So, but we just have to look at it. I think it's in the same way when we look at an ocean. When you come upon an ocean, you're awestruck by its vastness, and and when you sail across it, or you're sailing around it, even in its shores, you're just it's fathomless, it's vast. You don't have to understand every treasure or creature that's in it to appreciate the vastness and the glory of that ocean. And that's how I look at it, that if there's stuff that I can understand, that's a bonus. That's wonderful. That's magnificent. But the very fact that this is just so awe-inspiring and so, incredible, that humbles us as creatures, that what a gift humanity has been vouchsafed by God. Continuing on, again, this chapter, no parts of it has been translated. It's among the longer chapters, 125. So the concept of hellfire, he does expound on it relatively more than some of the other ones, because unfortunately there are a few, as you know who, some of the enemies of the Bab who have been consigned to this eternal hellfire, which is it's terrifying, Now, moving on to chapter 18. So we have 2 more chapters to go, and then we'll have some questions, live questions here. Chapter 18 is one of the shortest. In fact, is the shortest. It only has about 8 lines. And it reads on that there is no doubt about the appointed time. Now, he talks about time, which I found was just incredible. The concept of time here, and the time. Now here, this is a time about the appointed time. So the opening line of this very short chapter reads, the substance of this gate is that in every revelation of God's will, the appointed time, or Sa'at, is determined by his primal truth till such time as it shall be revealed. So it's about essentially that when the time comes, irrespective of who likes it or who doesn't like it, it's going to take place. And that's why it's a very short chapter. Just there's not much to expound, perhaps. When the time comes, it's the appointed hour. Nothing is going to prevent it from being established, for being manifest. There you have it. Again, no parts of this chapter has been translated or quoted by Dr. Saidi. 8 handwritten lines, the shortest chapter of the Bayán Farsi. Now, finally, get into chapter 19. Begins with these words, on that whatever is in the Bayán is a gift from God to him whom God shall make manifest. So this chapter is where Shoghi Effendi perhaps gets his commentary about, or a statement rather, that the Bayán is primarily a eulogy of him whom God shall make manifest. And this very clearly is what the Báb is saying. It says that whatever is in the Bayán is a gift from God to him whom God shall make manifest. Now, this concept of gift is very, very interesting. And the Báb expounds on this theme, and there's a passage that Dr. Saidi in The Gate of the Heart have been translated, which, you know, it's very apt here and gives a kind of a summary of it. So here it is. The substance of this gate or chapter is that in each dispensation, the writings of the manifestation of truth are a gift from God for himself toward his next revelation, which is the manifestation of his being in a subsequent resurrection. In like manner, all that is contained in the Bayán of various beloved modes is a gift from the point of the Bayán unto him whom God shall make manifest, who is the very next revelation of the point of the Bayán. The Báb continues, and this supreme glory and pride would suffice all should he accept a person or anything through the honor of association with himself. Then he goes on to say, how utterly remote is the man who severs his relation with him and forsakes the chance of being a true gift. Thus today, should the believers in the Quran desire to present the gift of the Apostle of God, the blessings of God rest upon him, they should one and all recognize the Bayán. Otherwise, they would sever themselves from the attributes of glory and sublimity. So with only 22 handwritten lines in the original language, chapter 19 is amongst the shorter ones, shorter chapters of book 2. Friends, this concludes the summary overview of the contents of the Bayán of Farsi, second Váḥid, or book 2. It only took me 3 weeks to come up with a slide presentation. Hopefully it gave you a perspective. There is a lot of materials that has been presented, and I want to say a couple of things. In our class, friends, we have people with different capacities. And God loves everyone, as we're told, within their capacity. We are all created unique. Some of us like to go very deep. As Abdul Baha says, the deeper you go, the more treasures you discover. But there are those who, as the late hand of the cause of God, Amatul Bahari Khanum said, just like to swim on the surface. And that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. This is the ocean. How you use it is up to you. Now, just as a consideration, friends, okay, is that if you're going to share things that you think is going to be a little bit beyond, you can email me or any of the, Dr. Stockman, Nima Rafi'i as well, who's the assistant for this course. And we'd be happy to explore some of these topics. I'm here for you, but I think we need to, you've got now enough material for 2 weeks to really focus on. So I know the first chapter was a little bit shorter. Some people were yearning for more. Now you've got it. Now you've got this second chapter with a lot of materials, a lot of quotes, a lot of materials. And there's going to be more. I mean, we're just exploring the ocean here. So just use your discretion. There's nothing wrong with going more in depth, wanting to learn more. We all do. But be also mindful of some of the people who are just here, to just experience the majesty, in what we have already, the House of Justice have provided. The Baha'i world, meaning from the selections from the writings. So anyways, I'm happy to, indulge you in whatever way I can. So Dr. Stockman, now we have some time for some questions. If the friends have some questions, I'm happy to.
Yeah, and we have several questions already. They've been, I think, accumulating. Well, they've been accumulating for a while because people have been thinking of them as they go.
Okay.
Stuart asks, are all the verses of the Bayán that the Baha'i World Center has translated available in selections from the writings of the Bab?
As far as I know, yes. Yeah, that's the one. I don't believe they have translated anything. Well, they may have translated, but it has not been published or available to the Baha'i world. Because if they would, now in recent times, you may have seen on the new website of the Baha'i World Center Baha'i Library, online library, the house have decided to share with the Baha'i world new translations of the writings of the Bab and the writings of Abdul Baha and Bahá'u'lláh, and they are there. But there's nothing of the Bab that I have seen recently. So the answer would be no. This is what we have so far. Maybe this year, maybe, I don't know. I am not privy to any of this information. There might be something. There might be something that the house may want to share, or they may not.
Right.
It's
bicentenary.
Yes, yeah.
What about the Guardian? Are there any translations from the Guardian of the Bayán that are either in selections from the writings of the Bab or available elsewhere?
No, when the House of Justice did the translation, they gathered all that the Guardian had translated. They normally do that with every translation of any tablet. They first look at to see whether the Guardian has translated it. For example, with even the Kitab al-Aqdas, those passages that the Guardian had translated it, they use that, and then they translate the ones that had not been translated. So that's generally the method at the Baha'i World Center, is that, whatever the Guardian would have, for example, quoted in his dispensation of Bahá'u'lláh or their various other letters, they're already in the selections from the writings of the Bab.
Nasreen asks just a basic translation question. What does the word thus mean? Thus it is the example she gives.
Thus it?
I suppose in this manner, it, or this way. Thus is usually short for something like that.
Well, that's the one. Is that the one I had translated, or is that the one that was translated? So perhaps this would be a good question if you email me with a more specific on which slide it was. I can then take a look at that and give you. But thus is basically, as far as my understanding, is therefore, right? Thus it is. So thus and therefore are somewhat similar in, yeah. So let's maybe we can explore that together later.
Sure. Stuart asks another very interesting question, that he notes that the Bab uses the word letter or letters in many, many different ways. Various references in Book 2, for example, letter of negation, letters of the living. Why do you think he uses the word letter in these various ways?
It's interesting. Well, the only way it comes to my mind, I mean, that we are all part of the creation, is part of, in some way, the Word of God. It encompasses all creation. So there are letters that make words, and there are words that make sentences, and there are sentences that make paragraphs, and the paragraphs that make chapters, and so on and so forth. So that's that perhaps one dimension of it is that there is that symbolic reference by the Bab to creation, as Baha'u'lláh refers to himself as a letter. I said that it's in the Iran, and the Bab refers to himself as the point, and that you need a point to start a letter. So again, there's all sorts of symbolism that's in there. But yes, it is very fascinating. He does use that the notion
metaphor.
Of letter. But perhaps maybe Nader may have talked about that. It may be a little bit more deeper.
Worth checking.
Yes.
Nasreen also, let me see if I think I may have cut off. I'm not sure what she's asking. It may well be considered if from the inception. I don't know what that means. Eric asks, one question from our New England study group is about what distinction there is between the words resurrection, return, or reincarnation, especially in the original Persian of the Persian Bayán. We found some clarification about the return of Muhammad and Mullah Hussein in Bahá'u'llah's Surah Váḥids. Perhaps Bob's explanation of death and clarification of other terms can provide further elucidation.
Well, the day of resurrection, Yom al-Qiyamah, okay, or as in Persian is Qiyamat. Though they're very distinct, and I think the Bab has commented, and there are translations by the Baha'i World Center about that concept, and that those passages, I believe they're there. There's a lot more, but I think they've given us enough, for us to be able to digest. Return is a bit different. Obviously, the concept of return is basically reappearance. That's essentially remanifestation of some sort. That's a little bit more complex. Reincarnation is completely a totally different thing. So I believe all three of them are very distinct, and they have their own explanations. And here, the Bab's focus is mostly on the day of resurrection in chapter 2.
Yeah, the notion of reincarnation is a concept that is certainly not Quranic. I guess it does occur in some Sufi writings, possibly influenced by Hinduism from India.
Yes.
But it's not normally found in Islam, that idea.
Yes.
Eric also asks another question from our group is if the order of the Váḥids and Babs of the Bayán is chronological, or if the Bab organized them in a non-chronological order like the Holy Quran. In other words, were they written in the order they appear, or were they written in other orders and then rearranged?
No, the Bayán is as the Bab intended it. What we have. I know the Quran, when it was, when the recension of, I wrote a paper in university about that, which is based on materials that are already available. But from what I gather, that the version that we have of the Quran is the Osmanic version, which is at the time of Usman, the third Khalifa of Islam. So, and putting, for example, Surat al-Baqarah, the surah of the cow, which is the lengthiest, and it's a Medinan, surah at, the second chapter, it seems that there should have been Meccan surah. So from certainly it's not chronological as we have. Whereas the Bayán is as was revealed by the Bab, because he reveals the chapter and says, so in the original, he actually numbers them. Now, I haven't translated this, but like, for example, he says, al-Bab al-Samin min al-Wahd al-Thani. So he says this is the 8th Bab, or the 8th gate from the second Váḥid. So that's it. He begins that. So he makes, and then he goes on. He says on the exposition of the truth of, let's say, death. That is there. So that's how it is. So the opening. It's very interesting. The opening lines of all the chapters are in Arabic, and then all the explanation in the chapter is in Persian. The sort of the meat of the matter, and so on. So as I said to you, this is the usage of Arabic and Persian, was very common in the 19th century. But there's definitely more. Majority is 95% of the Bayán is in Persian, at least the Persian Bayán is, and then there's a separate Arabic Bayán. So
that's very interesting. Eric asks a third question. We have 3 of them here. Could the bridge of Sirat be what the Baha'i writings refer to as the straight path?
Yes, yes, it certainly is. Well, the straight path, and I think Baha'u'lláh and Abdul Baha in their writings have talked about straight path as the basically, following the manifestation of God. So again, they built on what the Bab had already said. See, one of the interesting thing is that we read some of these concepts that already are translated and are in the corpus of Baha'i writings, sacred texts, but we don't realize that these were first enunciated by the Bab, in his revelation, because we have so little, or the Western, Baha'is know so little about, the writings. In fact, most Baha'is don't know much, because the writings of the Bab are very, they were very rare, because of the attempt to destroy them. And I think the first wonderful attempt in the West, a scholarly attempt, was The Gate of the Heart, or Is the Gate of the Heart, by Dr. Saidi, that gives us a wonderful perspective of the entire range of the Bab's revelation, and his writings. So I think that's something that more and more we are now able to explore, now that we know. But we certainly do need to explore. We do need texts that are more authoritative, and there are texts of the writings of the Bab that have been copied or printed. There's facsimiles of them in different versions. That's why scholars like Dr. Saidi and Dr. Todd Lawson and Dr. Omid Maghami and all the great scholars, academic scholars, have used. So they are available, but they're not readily available or published or translated into English.
Heather didn't ask a question, but made a note. I'm just mentioning this to people. She notes that your picture was frozen for a while and then it was unfrozen. And I just wanted to make a comment about that, because that's probably a local internet problem, because his picture never froze for me. And frequently, if you have problems with the audio or the video, receiving the audio or the video, it's often somewhere in the internet between the source, which is the GoToWebinar computer, and your own computer. So that's always the sort of thing that can happen. Maybe affect just one person and everyone else is seeing and hearing everything fine. Eric has another question. This is very interesting, I think. The Bab writes, the path of guidance is one of love and compassion, not of force and coercion. This hath been God's method in the past and shall continue to be in the future. So Eric's question is this abrogating a law of jihad given by Muhammad, or is it correcting a misunderstanding of jihad that grew up in the Muslim community?
Yeah, it's a very good question. I think there has been certainly a misunderstanding. There is well, let me just tell you this, that the notion of jihad understood by Muslims is diverse. I mean, there is the main the notion that is most Muslims believe that jihad is more of a personal effort on the part of the individual to make themselves a better Muslim.
Right.
It's the secondary meaning, the holy war, that is militant, was very limited historically to some of those defensive battles that the early Muslims had to deal with, like the Battle of Badr and various other battles of Prophet Muhammad that is recorded, and Uhud, and there's Khandaq, all these other battles. So I think the extremists clearly take out of context some of those historical passages, and they look at it from that point of view. So it becomes a more of a, and many Muslims believe that is the case, that these extremists who promote militant jihad, which I don't like to mention their names here, but you all know who they are. They're in the news all the time, are essentially those who are radically are interpreting something that most mainstream Muslims don't believe. Right. I believe. So anyway, so the Bab says that from the beginning, that has been really God was never. I mean, and if we look closely, we will see that none of the manifestations of God, with the exception of Prophet Muhammad, out of defensive, reasons, went to battle. There's none of them. You don't see Buddha going to battle. You don't see, maybe there was, and it's certainly not Jesus Christ, So the Bab essentially says that, God, that's also a reference to the expectation that the Shiites are having from the Bab, saying, okay, well, if you're a Qa'im, where's your sword? Where's your, the same way that when Jesus, the Messiah, was expected, the King of Jews, that he shall have a sword, will sit on the throne of David. I mean, those were very graphic. And when they looked at it and said, Messiah, this guy is a carpenter. I mean, how could he be the King of Jews? Whereas he was the King of Jews because it was a symbolic that his sword was his words, and so on and so forth. So here the Bab is also emphasizing, I believe, in a subtle way, that your expectation to the Shiites that the Qa'im, that I am, you had the wrong expectation from the Qa'im. Qa'im was never supposed to come and be a warrior, whereas they believe, the Shiites believe, that the Qa'im was particularly like, Muhammad and like Imam Hussein, that went to battle and, that was going to lead the army, I mean, it's very graphically, it's very much a militaristic expectation of the Qa'im. So here the Bab says, no, you're wrong. This is not what God's method has been in the past, nor shall it be in the future.
Yeah. It's interesting because I think there are references to the Israelites trying to enter the promised land and being turned back, but there are no references to Moses leading them into battle or anything like that. So that's sort of an interesting question there. Eric points out that Krishna went into battle, and that's true. Certainly the Bhagavad Gita is a long exposition on the eve of a battle that Krishna went into. But we also have no idea whether that's revelation or what. It's a really interesting problem trying to figure out what to make of the Bhagavad Gita.
Yeah.
Shidan says, does the concept in chapter 7 regarding the fruits of a revelation being gathered in the next revelation continue in Baha'u'llah's writings, i.e. does it apply to Baha'u'llah's revelation?
I think so. It's when the Bab says that it will continue, and it continues in, I mean, definitely some, those fruits. I mean, really, the revelation of him whom God shall make manifest is the superlative revelation, is the revelation that, I always, when I try to explain the revelation of the Bab, for me, my understanding is that his revelation was the bridge revelation, even though his identity is the same identity as that of the Bab, according to Baha'u'llah's explicit reference in Surat al-Haykal, and also Shoghi Effendi's exposition on this in Dispensation of Baha'u'llah. For me, the Bab bridged he was really the fulfillment of more of an Islamic promised one, and even though he was a universal manifestation of God, as we talked about, but he was primarily the fulfillment of the promise of Islam. And then Baha'u'llah was the fulfillment of the promise of all the religions, as being the supreme promised one, if you will.
I think that's a good analogy or description. Gwyn, who's been doing some digging in Gate of the Heart, says regarding the issue of the meaning of the word letter, see pages 334, 335. Could that be an answer to the question about letters? But unfortunately, we don't have the book in front of us, so I have no idea what the reference is to.
Yeah, I'm sure Nader has talked about that in his book. So Yeah, you guys can explore that. Remember, the gate of the heart is a supplementary. It's a supplementary text. It's not the main text that we are studying. And the parts that I feel that is relevant to our discussion, I will bring forth. But thank you, Gwen, for sharing that. Certainly I will look into it. And,
she may have just popped it out. Let me see. I've got the email from her. It's a lengthy passage, so I don't know if I want to.
The forum as well. So is there any other questions that is pressing?
No, that's it, actually. That's it. Maybe Gwen can put that particular passage into the forums because she just emailed it to me. I think that's it. And so thank you very much. Shahrukh, if nobody pops anything else in the next 10 seconds, we'll be done. So
okay. No, that's great. And next time will be book 3. Book 3
2
and
weeks.
2 weeks, book 3 and book 4. So we'll see where we go with that. But in the meantime, the students have a lot of materials to assimilate, and I'll be happy to, again, be there in case needs some clarifications. But thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to be here today. And I'll see you guys later.
Yep. And we're looking forward to the questions and I'm sure your answers. And Annette adds, thank you so much for recognizing the different capacities of us all. And that indeed is very important. We want everyone to feel included and being able to contribute and to enjoy the course.
Absolutely.
So thanks everyone for your comments, your questions, your patience for managing to make it all this way through. And we will see you again, Shahrukh, in 2 weeks.
Yes. Thank you very much.